The unlikely student. The Galactic Institute of Interstellar Learning stood as the crown jewel of education across the known universe. Its crystalline spires reached toward the stars from the surface of Zara Prime, reflecting the light of 3 suns in brilliant cascades of color. Every corridor hummed with the conversations of the galaxy's most exceptional minds, beings who had earned their place through demonstrations of extraordinary intelligence. In classroom Delta 41, however, one student seemed remarkably out of place. June Malone adjusted her pale blue uniform for the 100th time that morning, acutely aware of how her crumpled appearance contrasted with the pristine presentations of her classmates. At 11 years old, she was the first human ever admitted to the institute, not through merit, but through what she considered a cosmic joke. Earth's new membership in the galactic community required a token representative, and she'd won that particular lottery by scoring high on an intelligence test she barely remembered taking. Around her, students whispered in dozens of languages. The gelatinous Andromedans communicated through color changes in their translucent bodies, while the crystalline beings from the Centauri system created musical tones that made the air shimmer. June understood none of it, relying entirely on her universal translator and hoping she wasn't missing something important. "Attention, class," announced Professor Turil, her scaled form towering over the assembled students. The axolotl race was known throughout the galaxy for their precise thinking and emotional detachment, qualities that made Turil both an excellent teacher and utterly intimidating to a human child. The holographic displays around the room dimmed as Turil activated the main projector. "Today, we will attempt something that has challenged even the most advanced civilizations for millennia." June's stomach sank. Every challenge at the institute seemed designed to highlight exactly how unprepared she was for this place. While her classmates had been studying quantum mathematics since childhood, she still struggled with basic calculus. "We will be working with a Zephyrian," Turil continued, and the room fell silent. Even June knew what that meant. Zephyrians were legendary, beings of pure energy that existed between the physical and metaphysical planes. They were nearly impossible to tame, requiring perfect synchronization of mind and spirit. Only the most advanced telepathic species had ever achieved consistent success with them. The professor's claws danced through the air, and the room filled with brilliant light. When June's eyes adjusted, she gasped. Floating in the center of the classroom was the most beautiful creature she'd ever seen, no larger than a house cat, but radiating waves of blue and white energy. Its transparent wings created soft harmonic echoes, and its silver eyes seemed to look directly into her soul. "The task is simple in concept," Turil explained, though her tone suggested otherwise. "You must establish a neural link with the Zephyrian and guide it through a series of mental exercises. Failure will result in immediate dismissal from this course." Hands, tentacles, and various appendages shot into the air as students volunteered. June slumped lower in her seat, hoping to disappear entirely. She had no telepathic abilities, no advanced training, no special talents that could possibly help her with this task. One by one, her classmates attempted the bonding process. Each failure was more spectacular than the last. The Zephyrian either ignored them completely, recoiled in apparent disgust, or dissolved into a puddle of light before reforming at its starting position. "Perhaps this exercise exceeds your current capabilities," Turil said with barely concealed disappointment after the 15th consecutive failure. That's when the Zephyrian did something unexpected. Its glowing gaze turned directly toward June, and the entire room fell silent. The creature floated closer, its bioluminescence intensifying with each inch. "No," June whispered, shaking her head. "No way." But the Zephyrian had made its choice. It hovered just inches from her desk, waiting with what appeared to be infinite patience. "This is highly irregular," Turil muttered, her silver scales shifting to a pale green, the axolotl equivalent of shock. "Human, step forward." Every fiber of June's being screamed at her to refuse, to avoid the inevitable humiliation. But the entire class was staring now, their combined attention heavier than gravity itself. With a resigned sigh, she stood and walked to the center of the room. The Zephyrian floated before her, its energy creating tiny fractals that shimmered across its translucent form. Up close, it was even more mesmerizing, and terrifying. "Proceed," Tyrrell instructed. June glanced back at her professor. "Proceed with what?" "Establish the neural link. If you require instructions, you have already failed." Great, June thought. No pressure at all. She extended her hands toward the creature, expecting it to flee like it had with everyone else. Instead, it moved closer, its light softening. June closed her eyes, unsure of what to do next. What did it even mean to establish a neural link? She was just a kid from Earth who barely understood long division. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of trying to force a connection, she simply let her mind wander to memories that felt safe and warm, her mother humming while cooking, the smell of rain on summer afternoons, the gentle purring of her old cat. The Zephyrian's glow intensified, and a collective gasp rippled through the classroom as the creature landed gently on her outstretched palms. Its energy felt warm and comforting, like sunlight filtering through leaves. For the first time since arriving at the institute, June smiled. Maybe being different wasn't such a bad thing after all. The legendary test. The Zephyrian's warmth spread through June's hands and up her arms, carrying with it something she hadn't expected, the creature's thoughts. They weren't words exactly, more like emotions and images woven together in an intricate tapestry. She saw vast expanses of stars, felt a sense of endless freedom, and curiously, glimpsed an impression of herself, small, fragile, but undeniably different. "Impossible," Professor Tyrrell murmured, her scales shifting to deeper shades of green. The classroom erupted into chaos as students whispered, buzzed, and chirped in a dozen different languages, all expressing the same sentiment, disbelief. June barely noticed the commotion. The Zephyrian was showing her something new, a twisting, glowing maze suspended in the void of space. The image came with a sense of invitation, almost like a question. "Wait," June said aloud, looking down at the creature perched in her palms. "You want me to?" Before she could finish, the classroom dissolved around her. Or rather, her perception of it did. One moment she was standing in Delta 41 surrounded by shocked alien students, the next she found herself on a platform of pure light, the maze from her vision stretching out before her in impossible directions. The Zephyrian, now perched on her shoulder, hummed softly. Its bioluminescence pulsed in rhythm with her rapidly accelerating heartbeat. "This is insane," June muttered, staring at the maze. It defied every law of physics she knew, paths that curved up and down simultaneously, bridges that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, and gaps that appeared to be filled with swirling energy rather than empty space. The creature responded with a wave of reassurance, projecting images of illuminated paths into her mind. Somehow, it knew the way through this impossible labyrinth. "Great," she said dryly. "The glowing space creature knows what it's doing. Guess I'll just trust the alien magic." Behind her, a sound like static began to grow louder. June turned and felt her stomach drop. The platform she'd been standing on was disintegrating into shimmering particles, the destruction spreading steadily in her direction. "Right," she muttered. "Standing still is not an option." The path ahead split into three directions, each more uninviting than the last. One veered sharply upward into a vortex of crackling energy, another twisted downward into a chasm of shadow, and the third spiraled outward, its glowing thread disappearing into what looked like a cloud of shattered glass. The Zephyrian nudged her toward the spiraling path, its light dimming slightly as if urging her to hurry. With no better plan and the static growing louder behind her, June stepped onto the narrow thread of light. Walking the path felt like traversing a tightrope over an abyss. Every step required perfect balance as the narrow beam curved and twisted through space. June stretched her arms out for stability, trying not to look down at the infinite darkness below. "What happens if I fall?" she asked aloud, though the answer was probably obvious. The Zephyrian's response wasn't reassurance this time, it was urgency. The creature's glow turned a deeper shade of blue, and June felt a spike of anxiety that wasn't her own. As they drew closer to the cloud of shattered glass, June realized her earlier assessment had been wrong. The shards weren't just decorative, they were moving, rotating in precise, razor-sharp patterns. They glimmered with malevolent light, their edges vibrating like tuning forks and creating an ominous harmonic resonance that made her teeth ache. "You're kidding me," she said, stopping just short of the swirling death trap. "You want me to walk into a blender?" The Zephyrian's glow flared briefly, an unmistakable signal to keep moving. The static behind them was getting closer, and June could feel the heat of the disintegrating platform on her back. Taking a shaky breath, she stepped forward into the storm of glass. The first shard zipped past her head so close she felt the static charge it left in the air. She ducked instinctively, nearly losing her balance on the narrow beam. Another shard whistled past her ear, and she twisted away from it, her movements clumsy but just quick enough to keep her alive. "How is this a test?" she shouted, her voice echoing in the vast emptiness as she ducked, weaved, and occasionally leaped to avoid the razor-sharp projectiles. "This is a murder maze. Don't you guys have liability laws out here?" The Zephyrian hummed in what might have been amusement, but its light flickered unevenly. June glanced at it, alarmed. The creature seemed distracted, its silver eyes focused on something behind them. She turned and her breath caught in her throat. The static wasn't just the sound of disintegrating platforms. A massive shadowy figure was forming in the distance, its shape shifting and expanding like ink spilled in water. It was utterly alien and completely terrifying, and it was coming straight for them. "Fantastic," June muttered, dodging another glass shard. "It's not bad enough I have to play dodgeball with flying razors. Now I've got a space blob chasing me." The Zephyrian's urgency intensified, its glow turning almost electric blue. It projected a single, crystal-clear thought into her mind: run. June didn't need to be told twice. She broke into a sprint, her feet barely touching the glowing thread as she raced through the maze. The glass shards became a blur around her, cutting through the void with sharp metallic sounds. Behind her, the shadow roared, or at least that's how her brain interpreted the low-frequency vibration that rattled her bones and made her vision blur. The glowing path beneath her suddenly veered sharply to the left. June skidded to a halt just in time to avoid stepping into nothingness, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The Zephyrian buzzed impatiently, its wings flaring as it urged her to follow the new path. But this route led directly toward what appeared to be a wall of pure energy, crackling with dangerous-looking lightning. "Are you sure this is the right way?" June panted, glancing back at the approaching shadow. The creature was close enough now that she could see its form more clearly, if form was even the right word for something that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. The Zephyrian's response was immediate and emphatic: trust. With the shadow bearing down on them and no other options available, June gritted her teeth and ran straight toward the wall of lightning. Into the void. The wall of energy loomed before June like a crackling curtain of death. Lightning arced across its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with barely contained power. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to find another way, but the Zephyrian's urgent humming pushed her forward. "This better work," she gasped, and dove through the energy barrier. The world exploded into white-hot sensation. For a terrifying moment, June felt like she was being torn apart at the molecular level. Lightning coursed through her body, but instead of pain, she experienced something extraordinary. She could suddenly sense the maze's entire structure, see every path and trap as clearly as if she were viewing a map. She tumbled onto a platform of solid crystal, gasping and shaking. The Zephyrian landed beside her, its glow now a brilliant gold instead of blue. "Did you know that would happen?" June demanded, pushing herself to her feet. The creature's response was a wave of gentle amusement. Behind them, the shadow creature slammed into the energy wall and recoiled with a sound like breaking glass. It couldn't follow them through, at least not directly. "Okay," June said, looking around at their new surroundings. "Where to now?" They stood in what appeared to be the maze's central hub. Paths stretched out in every direction, some leading up, others down, and a few that seemed to twist through dimensions she couldn't even name. In the center of the platform stood a pedestal holding a sphere of swirling light. The Zephyrian flew to the sphere and hovered above it expectantly. As June approached, images flashed through her mind, not from the creature this time, but from the sphere itself. She saw the maze's history, its purpose, and most importantly, its true nature. "This isn't just a test," she whispered, understanding flooding through her. "It's a key. You're showing me how to unlock something." The sphere pulsed in response to her words. June reached out tentatively and placed her hands on its surface. The moment her skin made contact, the entire maze began to shift and change. Walls rearranged themselves, new paths appeared, and the oppressive darkness that had filled the void started to recede. But their victory was short-lived. The platform beneath them began to crack, and through the fissures, June could see the shadow creature rising from below. It had found another way to reach them. "Time to go," she said, grabbing the sphere. The moment she lifted it from the pedestal, a new path materialized, a bridge of pure light stretching across the void toward what looked like an exit portal. The Zephyrian took off immediately, its golden glow illuminating their way. June ran after it, the sphere clutched tightly to her chest. Behind them, the platform exploded in a shower of crystal fragments as the shadow creature finally broke through. The bridge of light felt more solid than the previous paths, but it was also narrow and had no railings. June tried not to think about the infinite drop on either side as she sprinted toward the portal. The Zephyrian stayed close, occasionally projecting words of encouragement directly into her thoughts. Halfway across the bridge, June made the mistake of looking back. The shadow creature wasn't just following them anymore, it was consuming the bridge behind them, devouring the light itself. The destruction was gaining on them fast. "Can you make me run faster?" June asked the Zephyrian desperately. The creature's response was immediate. A surge of energy flowed through June's body, and suddenly she was moving at superhuman speed. Her feet barely touched the bridge as she flew toward the portal, the sphere in her arms growing brighter with each step. They reached the exit just as the shadow creature's tendrils brushed against June's heels. She dove through the portal, the Zephyrian beside her, and tumbled into Classroom Delta 41. June hit the floor hard, still clutching the sphere of light. Around her, the alien students sat in stunned silence, their various eyes, sensors, and perception organs all focused on her. Professor Turrell stood frozen, her scales now a brilliant shade of gold that June had never seen before. "Impossible," the professor whispered, her translator struggling with the emotional undertones in her voice. "In 3,000 years of testing, no student has ever retrieved the core sphere. Most don't even survive the first challenge." June looked down at the glowing orb in her hands, then at the Zephyrian perched on her shoulder. The creature seemed remarkably pleased with itself. "The core sphere?" June asked, getting to her feet. "The heart of the maze," Turrell explained, approaching slowly as if June might disappear at any moment. "It's said to contain the accumulated wisdom of the first Zephyrian masters. According to legend, only one who can truly communicate with the Zephyrians without artificial enhancement or telepathic abilities can claim it." The classroom erupted into excited chatter as the implications sank in. June, the human girl who barely understood quantum mathematics, had accomplished something that the galaxy's greatest minds had failed to achieve for millennia. But June wasn't paying attention to the celebration. She was looking at the Zephyrian, finally understanding what it had been trying to tell her all along. This wasn't just about passing a test or proving herself worthy of the Institute. The real challenge was just beginning. The shadow chase. The celebration in Classroom Delta 41 was short-lived. As June held the core sphere, its warm light suddenly began to flicker erratically. The Zephyrian on her shoulder tensed, its golden glow shifting to an alarming shade of deep red. "Something's wrong," June said, but before she could explain further, the classroom lights died. In the darkness, emergency illumination cast eerie shadows across the walls. Through the transparent aluminum windows, they could see similar power fluctuations throughout the institute. Other buildings flickered like dying candles against the star-filled sky of Zara Prime. Professor Terrell's scales had turned black, a color June had never seen on an axolotl before. "Impossible," the professor whispered, her voice barely audible. "The shadow wraiths were sealed away eons ago." "Shadow wraiths?" June asked, though part of her already knew the answer. The creature that had chased her through the maze hadn't been part of the test at all. The Zephyrian projected urgent images into June's mind, ancient battles between beings of light and creatures of consuming darkness, wars fought across dimensions, and a terrible truth: by retrieving the core sphere, she had weakened the barriers that kept the shadow wraiths imprisoned. They fed on the maze's power, Trill explained, her scientific training overriding her shock. The test was never just an academic exercise, it was a lock, keeping them contained in the void between dimensions. Through the windows, June could see dark shapes moving between the buildings. They weren't solid like the creature in the maze had appeared, but rather gaps in reality itself, spaces where light and matter simply ceased to exist. "We have to get out of here," June said, but the Zephyrian buzzed urgently and projected a different message: "Not run. Fix. Fix." June looked down at the core sphere in her hands. Its light was still flickering, but now she could sense something else, a resonance between the sphere and the Zephyrian, like two parts of a greater whole seeking to reunite. The classroom door burst open, and Institute security forces flooded in, a mix of species June didn't recognize, all heavily armed with energy weapons. Their leader, a towering being with crystalline skin and 4 arms, approached Professor Terrell. "Evacuation protocols are in effect," the security chief announced. "All students and faculty must reach the emergency shelters immediately." "Wait," June interrupted, stepping forward. "The wraiths are here because of what I did, right? Because I took this?" She held up the sphere. The security chief's multifaceted eyes focused on her with startling intensity. "Human child, you have unleashed forces beyond your comprehension. The sphere must be contained until our experts can." "No," June said firmly. The Zephyrian's glow intensified, supporting her decision. "I think I know what needs to happen, but I need to get back to the maze." "Absolutely not," Trill said, her scales shifting to aggressive orange. "The maze space is collapsing. Even if you could survive the journey, the dimensional instability would." Her words were cut off as the building shook violently. Through the windows, they could see one of the Institute's towers simply vanish, consumed by a massive shadow wraith. Where the building had stood, there was now nothing, not even empty space, just an absence that hurt to look at. "They're getting stronger," June realized. The longer the sphere is separated from the maze, the more the barriers weaken. The Zephyrian flew from her shoulder to hover in the center of the room, its light now pulsing in complex patterns. Other students gasped as the creature began to sing, not audibly, but in harmonics that bypassed the ears entirely and resonated in their minds. In response to the song, the core sphere in June's hands began to glow brighter. The flickering stopped, replaced by steady, warm light that pushed back the emergency shadows. "It's calling to others," Trill breathed. "The Zephyrian is summoning its kind." Through the windows, points of light began to appear across the campus, dozens, then hundreds of Zephyrians emerging from wherever they had been hiding. They flew toward the classroom in perfect formation, their combined radiance pushing back the encroaching darkness. But June could sense it wouldn't be enough. The shadow wraiths were ancient and powerful, and they had been feeding on the maze's energy for who knew how long. The Zephyrian's light could hold them back temporarily, but it couldn't restore the dimensional barriers. "I have to go back," June said quietly. "The sphere doesn't just unlock the maze's secrets, it is the maze, or at least its heart. And hearts belong with their bodies." The security chief stepped forward. "Child, that is suicide. The maze space is filled with wraiths now. Even with Zephyrian protection. She won't be going alone." Everyone turned as a new voice filled the room. In the doorway stood Director Kai Then, the Institute's leader. The ancient being's form was difficult to look at directly, she seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, her edges blurring into probability clouds. "Director," Trill began, but Kai then raised a hand that might have had 6 fingers or 7, depending on the viewing angle. "The human child speaks truth," the director said, her voice resonating with harmonics that suggested vast age and wisdom. "The barriers can only be restored from within the maze itself. But June Malone will not face this challenge alone." She gestured, and the air shimmered. Suddenly, the classroom was filled with figures, not physical beings, but projections of the Institute's greatest alumni from across the centuries. Scientists, explorers, warriors, and scholars from a dozen species, all offering their knowledge and support. "Every student who has ever walked these halls owes their education to the maze's protection," Kai then continued. "It is time to repay that debt." June looked around at the assembled minds, then down at the Zephyrian, which had returned to her shoulder. The creature's message was clear: together. "All right," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Let's go fix this mess." Outside, the shadow wraiths roared their anger as the combined light of hundreds of Zephyrians began to form a protective corridor leading back toward the maze portal. The real battle was about to begin. "NS chose you for a reason." Outside the protective tunnel, shadow wraiths pressed against the barriers of light, their presence creating waves of nothingness that made reality itself seem unstable. June could feel their hunger, not for food or energy, but for existence itself. They wanted to unmake everything. The Zephyrian on her shoulder hummed constantly now, its song weaving together with those of its companions to maintain the protective corridor. The core sphere in June's arms pulsed in rhythm with their music, growing brighter as they approached the maze chamber. "There!" Professor Turiel called out, pointing ahead to the familiar doorway of the testing room. But the space beyond looked nothing like the classroom they had left. The maze portal was fully active now, reality bending and twisting around it like water around a drain. Director Kai then materialized beside them, her multidimensional form stabilizing slightly. "The barriers are failing faster than anticipated. You must hurry." June nodded and stepped toward the portal, but the Zephyrian suddenly buzzed urgently. It projected a new image into her mind, not of the maze as she had experienced it, but as it truly was, a vast network connecting countless dimensions, with the shadow wraiths pouring through tears in its structure like water through a broken dam. "It's not just about returning the sphere," June realized aloud. "The maze itself needs to be rebuilt." "Impossible," Turiel said. "The original architects were beings of pure thought who transcended physical existence millennia ago. No one remembers the construction techniques." But the Zephyrian was showing June something else, memories passed down through generations of its kind, images of the maze's creation. She saw how the barriers between dimensions had been woven together using threads of crystallized possibility, anchored by nodes of concentrated willpower. "I don't need to remember," June said, understanding flooding through her. "I just need to listen." She stepped through the portal. The maze space was chaos. Where before there had been structured paths and challenges, now there were only fragments floating in a void filled with hungering shadows. The shadow wraiths had consumed most of the maze's substance, leaving behind jagged tears in reality itself. But the Zephyrians were already there, hundreds of them arranged in complex geometric patterns throughout the space. Their combined song created islands of stability in the chaos, and as June appeared with the core sphere, their music intensified. The sphere in her hands began to resonate with their song, and suddenly June could see what needed to be done. The sphere wasn't just the maze's heart, it was a template, containing the blueprint for the entire structure. But it needed a conductor, someone to channel its power and guide the reconstruction. "I don't know how," she whispered to the Zephyrian. Its response was immediate: "You do. You already have." And June realized it was right. Every challenge she had faced in the maze, every path she had chosen, every moment of trust between her and the Zephyrians, all of it had been preparation for this moment. She raised the core sphere above her head and let her mind open completely to the song of the Zephyrians. Power flowed through her, not overwhelming but supportive, like being carried by a vast, gentle current. Around her, the maze began to rebuild itself. Paths of light extended from the sphere, weaving through dimensions and sealing the tears the shadow wraiths had created. The creatures of darkness shrieked as their feeding grounds disappeared, but they could not touch the growing network of light. June felt herself becoming part of the construction, her consciousness expanding to encompass the entire maze. She was simultaneously the small human girl holding a glowing sphere and the vast structure spanning multiple realities. The paradox should have driven her mad, but the Zephyrian's song kept her grounded, their ancient wisdom guiding her human intuition. One by one, the shadow wraiths were pushed back into the void between dimensions. The tears in reality sealed themselves as the maze's barriers strengthened. And at the center of it all, the core sphere settled into its proper place, not as a separate object, but as an integral part of the structure itself. When the last note of the Zephyrian's song faded, June found herself back in classroom Delta 41. The emergency lights had been replaced by normal illumination, and through the windows, she could see the Institute's building standing whole and undamaged. "Remarkable," Director Kai then said, her form now stable and clearly visible. "In all recorded history, no being has ever successfully reconstructed a dimensional maze. You have not merely passed your test, June Malone, you have redefined what we thought possible." Around the room, her alien classmates looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect that she had never seen before. These beings who had been born into advanced civilizations, who had been studying quantum mechanics since before she could walk, were looking at her as if she had accomplished something truly extraordinary. Professor Turiel approached, her scales now a soft shade of silver that June recognized as profound respect. "The Academy's records will show that you have achieved the highest possible marks in every category. But more than that, you have earned something that cannot be measured by any test." "What's that?" June asked. "The trust of the Zephyrians themselves." The creature on her shoulder hummed softly, and June felt its contentment like warm sunlight. Around the room, other Zephyrians had appeared, perching on desks and floating near students who looked at them with newfound wonder. "From this day forward," Director Kai then announced, "the Institute will offer a new course of study, intuitive dimensional navigation, based on the techniques you have pioneered today. And you, June Malone, will be our first instructor." June's eyes widened. "Me? Teach? But I barely understand what happened myself." "That," said the director with what might have been a smile, "is precisely why you are qualified. Understanding and doing are not always the same thing. You have shown that sometimes the greatest achievements come not from vast knowledge, but from the willingness to trust, to listen, and to act with an open heart." The Zephyrian on her shoulder projected one final image into her mind, not of the past or present, but of the future. She saw herself standing before classes of students from across the galaxy, teaching them not formulas or theories, but how to quiet their minds and listen to the universe itself. Some would struggle with the concept, too trained in rigid thinking to adapt. But others would flourish, learning to navigate the spaces between dimensions with the same intuitive grace that had carried her through the maze. "I suppose," June said, looking around at her classmates who were now her peers in a way she had never imagined possible, "Earth's representative to the galactic community just got a lot more interesting." Professor Turiel let out what sounded suspiciously like a laugh, something June had never heard from an Axolotl before. "Indeed. Though I suspect your greatest lesson for all of us has already been taught." "What's that?" "That sometimes the most unlikely student becomes the most extraordinary teacher." As the class dispersed, students from a dozen worlds approaching June with questions and congratulations, she felt the Zephyrian's warm presence in her mind one last time. The message was simple but profound: welcome home. For the first time since arriving at the Galactic Institute of Interstellar Learning, June Malone truly felt like she belonged. Not because she had proven herself by alien standards, but because she had discovered that being different, being human, wasn't a disadvantage at all. It was exactly what the universe needed. The girl who had once felt completely out of place among the galaxy's brightest minds now stood at the center of a new understanding that would reshape education across the stars. She had not just broken records, she had broken barriers, opened minds, and proven that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from the most unexpected sources. And in the years that followed, as her teaching method spread throughout the Institute and beyond, students across the galaxy would learn that the path to true understanding wasn't always about having the right answers. Sometimes, it was about asking the right questions, trusting the journey, and remembering that even in a universe filled with wonders, the greatest magic of all was the willingness to remain open to possibilities. The end.